Hello everybody, glad you're joining me here today. The Germa 66 cover story came to an end this week, and personally I could have used a little bit more reveals from it, specifically related to Sanji's parents. So now Oda has gone back to drawing characters with animals, and you kind of get hit over the head with the amount of symbolism in this one. Got Luffy in a field of his corresponding flower. The obvious connection between Luffy and the sun god is depicted there with what appears to be Prometheus in the corner, and then we also have the future king of the pirates symbolism there as well, with the king of the jungle. And yet, as it turns out, the sunny disposition of the cover creates a stark contrast with the atrocity that takes place within the pages of the chapter itself. So grab yourself some wholesome sun rays and flower watering, because you're about to enter Murderland! I've also been reading a lot of comments over the weekend, and you can just tell from the discussions and from what people are saying, you can kind of tell that a lot of people deep down, they kind of feel like something's not right.
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
By the way, another interesting thing about the cover is that it makes a perfect pair with the one from chapter 568, which features Zoro looking for a lion who stole his sake. We get a brief explanation from Trader York that shows the commands that she gave the Seraphim before they started attacking everybody, the best part of which is the little thumbs up that we see S-Snake give her an understanding. Regardless, something that still remains to be explained here is that Vegapunk previously said that the satellites connect to Punk Records once a day to synchronize their memories and knowledge. So if York had been planning this for over a day, which is obviously the case since we saw her call Marijoa a couple of times, and she's also been kidnapping the Cypher Pole agents, it's important for the reader to know how it was that she stopped herself from synchronizing her thoughts or her mind with the other satellites. And also, I think it's important to know why it was that the other satellites did not suspect that York was doing that. Like, I wonder if the reason for why nobody found out sooner was because they just assumed, well, York is just in charge of eating, pooping, and sleeping, so it's not like her updates are going to be extremely interesting or useful. It's not like we're missing out on anything important. Anyway, York also tells the Seraphim that there's a location within the lab that she doesn't want them to damage. And so given what we know already, I think that location can only be one of two places. The first is the secret section that hides the ancient giant, so maybe York could be thinking about doing something with the armor. And then the second option would be the second floor, which is where we previously saw Stussy, Sanji, and Jinbei. And this is because Stussy specifically says that that floor is the weapons development floor, so it's important that nobody cause any big vibrations. And that turns out to be a perfect segue into what we see approaching the island of Egghead, which is a vessel belonging to the Blackbeard pirates. So it was a nice surprise for me to learn that the shocking incident will involve Blackbeard, or at least some of his crew, which means that we're going to end up learning what happened to Law very soon. Now, regardless of who's showing up from the BBP here, I think that from a story standpoint, given that Sanji recently mentioned the power of love, I think it'd be a good idea for Pudding to be aboard that ship. Then again, I also think that if either Aokiji or Law happen to be aboard that ship, then that will also end up throwing a wrench into the machine. So as long as either Pudding, Kuzan, or Law are aboard that ship, it'll end up triggering something major. Now, I doubt Oda will be doing the same thing twice, but that scene where we see the residents of Egghead boarding the evacuation ship really reminded me of that scene from Robin's flashback where we see the people of O'Hara also board an evacuation ship, and then they stop Robin from boarding it, and then Akainu shows up and kills them all by blowing up the ship. And speaking of exploding ships, we go to Warland, where we find Shanks reading an SBS section on Kid. And so by reading Kid's Vivre card, Shanks finds out not only that Kid is from the South Blue, but that he also has a history of not being kind to bystanders and civilians, which is why his bounty was so high, pre-TIMESKIP. So Kid and Shanks are sort of opposites in terms of personality, because Kid has been known to slaughter people who have laughed at him in the past, whereas Shanks kind of just brushes it off and says, as long as you don't hurt my friends, it's not a big deal. There's only one character that would be more opposite to Shanks than Kid, and that would be Blackbeard, because Teach actually killed a crewmate to get what he wanted, which is something that Shanks would never do. In fact, I'm pretty sure that Kid wouldn't do that either, because in Wano, after he escapes Udon prison, Kid actually lets himself be caught again so that he can be with Killer. And speaking of Wano, we get a statement from Shanks that is very clearly intended to be damage control for the reason for why the Red Hair Pirates arrived at Wano by the end. Because now Shanks is heavily implying that the reason they were there was to try to intercept Teach in case he showed up. But of course, we all know the truth. The real reason Oda had the Red Hair Pirates show up and then had Shanks clown an admiral by the end is because he wanted to promote Film Red. There's actually a scene in that chapter where Lucky Roo says, "Hey Captain, let's go see Luffy." And then Shanks says, I'm not interested in seeing Luffy. So if it were true that they were just there to try to intercept Teach, then why not have Shanks say that in that moment? Why not have Shanks say something like, remember, Lucky Roo, we're not here to see Luffy. We're here waiting for Teach in case he shows up. Actually, it didn't even have to be that specific. Shanks just could have said something like, remember our true goal, remember our true objective, Lucky Roo, just alluding to the fact that they were there for another reason. So it definitely makes it sound as if that line from Shanks is an effort from Oda to make up for the fact that he really wanted to sell Film Red tickets. Anyhow, Kid ends up creating his railgun, and he also starts using his magnetism powers to draw some of the ships of Shanks' allies towards him. And it's very clear from Shanks' future sight vision that Kid is planning on killing these people, Kinemon style. So similar to what we saw him do in Film Red, Shanks jumps/flies off the Red Force, proceeds to cut Kid's railgun somewhere down the middle, and also simultaneously attacks him with a move from his former sensei named Divine Departure. Now, I've read people argue that this is actually not a one-shot, but that it's actually a two-shot, because in addition to him taking the Divine Departure swing, he's also getting hit with the explosion of the railgun. So I did some brief research about this, and I actually ended up visiting a weapons forum where people were talking about railguns. And there's a guy there who made a comment who claimed to be an engineer, and he was making the connection between the composition of a railgun and some phenomenons that we've seen with anti-tank weaponry. So he said the following. He said, when you hit something that fast, the behavior of metal changes. If you hit the armor just right, then you can actually get the inside of the tank to shatter, basically turning the inside of the tank into a shrapnel grenade, killing the operators. Regardless, though, I think we can all agree that this is still pretty brutal treatment from Oda towards Kid and Killer, because Killer also gets caught in the blast. Now, assuming that Bonnie will eventually stop crying and actually do something, at this point, I think it's very clear that the only member of the worst generation that has been treated worse than Kid and Killer is Hawkins. I've also seen comments point out sort of like the poetry factor in Heat, asking Shanks to be spared, asking him for mercy, given that we saw him making fun of Sanji for asking Robin's help. Also, as an aside really quick, I think it's definitely worth mentioning that the art in those double-page spreads, especially the one with Dory and Broggy splitting Victoria Punk down the middle like that was the definition of clean. So it's sad but beautiful at the same time. Plus, their dialogue takes things back to chapter 1 when Shanks says that when a man points a pistol at someone, he should be prepared to put his life on the line. So him, Dory, and Broggy seem to have a similar code, which aligns with what Shanks said about him and the Giants being old friends. Now, when it comes to the mixed reaction that I've seen floating around online for this chapter, I think that it could be divided in two parts. The first one is the power scaling aspect of it and the consistency or lack of consistency in terms of the power system that has been established throughout the story. Although I'm sure that, some people might argue that power scaling never made sense in the first place. But regardless, there are some people that are very invested in that aspect of the story. But then the other part of it has more to do with intentionality, with authorial intent. So I'll start with the power scaling aspect first and then work my way up. Now, in order to have a better understanding on the questions that people are bringing up, I think it's important that we go back to Wano. Specifically, we have to go back to Onigashima. If we take a look at Kid's trajectory from the beginning of the raid up until the point where Big Mom falls into the hole with the bombs, we find that Kid is doing one of two things. He's either jogging/running, getting to where he needs to be, or he's fighting. From point A to point B, those are the only two things he does. He's either on cardio or he's taking hits or dishing them out, okay? There are no breaks for Kid. He doesn't get mink medicine or anything. He doesn't have a lunch break. He takes damage on the main floor from Apu. Then he goes up to the rooftop with Killer. He gets damaged there by some of Big Mom's attacks. And then eventually Big Mom uses an attack called Fulgora with Hera on Kid and Killer, and that ends up pushing them back into the skull. That happens and it's right back onto cardio because he has to go and find Big Mom, and eventually he does so and saves Nami and Usopp from her. And then we find out that Hawkins has a voodoo doll that transfers all the damage he takes onto Kid. So as Kid is trying to confront Big Mom and getting hit by Big Mom, he's also taking damage from another ongoing fight. That issue gets resolved with Kid defeating Hawkins, and then we see that Kid takes an Ikoku sovereignty from Big Mom. Like, we literally see a panel of him taking Ikoku sovereignty. And somehow, none of that is able to KO him. No breaks, no recovery time, none of that is able to KO Kid. And yet here comes Shanks. One swing from Shanks. And it's not just game over for Kid. It's not just KO Kid. It's KO Killer as well. He KO'd both of them. So I guess I was right all those years ago when I made this video ranking the Yonko. I want it to be right, don't get me wrong, but not like this. I actually even doubt that the hardcore Shanks fans wanted this. Like the people that think that Shanks is top one, I even doubt they wanted this. Or maybe they did want this, but they didn't want this way. Because it does raise a lot of questions. Like if Shanks was always this strong, and not only is he this strong, but he also has the strongest crew, then that means that the idea, this notion of the Yonko in the New World being somehow comparable to each other in power, and them maintaining some kind of hypothetical balance in the New World, that is just a complete lie. Granted, the Yonko system kind of turned into a joke the moment Buggy became one, but you get what I'm saying. Shanks' portrayal in this one chapter exceeds the portrayal that we got from Big Mom and Kaido in Wano. So it could be that maybe Shanks is just that good of a good guy that he just doesn't want to get into unnecessary fights with people. What's interesting about that, though, is that I think the fandom pretty much understands or has this idea that Law and Kid are sort of comparable in power, right? Like people have them kind of like around the same level, I think, for the most part. And so if we take that premise that Law is comparable to Kid, we saw what Law was able to do to Teach in his fight in Winter Island. He was able to damage Blackbeard the same way that he damaged Big Mom. And yet we also know that Teach was able to permanently scar Shanks, and Shanks tells Whitebeard that the reason he got the scar was not because he was careless. It was not because he dropped his guard or anything, which means that he was taking Teach seriously. Okay, so Teach is able to permanently scar Shanks in a fight that Shanks says that he was taking seriously, yet at the same time, Shanks is able to KO Killer and a character that's comparable to Law with one swing, yet at the same time, Law is able to damage Teach like this. Looks like we got a rocks, paper, scissors situation going on here. Then again, when Law damages Teach, Van Ogre does say that Teach was careless because he jumped in without a plan. So maybe that helps make sense of this. Additionally, we also saw Roger use Divine Departure on Odin, which sent Odin flying through a bunch of trees, but then soon after that, Odin hit the ground running and came back to witness the fight against Whitebeard and Roger. And this all happened at a time where Odin didn't have advanced COC because he's surprised at the fact that Whitebeard and Roger are not touching during their fight. So at that point in time, Odin just knew about basic COC. He didn't have the advanced version of it, which if you think about it, that's also where Kid is at the moment as well. Now, if the Divine Departure that Roger used on Odin is equal in power to the one that Shanks uses in this chapter, then what does that say considering we know that Odin lost to Kaido from an off-guard sneak attack? And so now we can get into the part of trying to decipher Oda's intentions. What was Oda trying to do with this? Because this was sad. It wasn't like with Luffy getting one-shotted by Kaido, by the Rame Hake. Like the reason we were able to joke around and have a good time with that one is because the context, the timing, and the character were completely different. That happened in the first act of Wano, and even then, Luffy was able to land some hits. We knew that Luffy was gonna bounce back after that one, because he's the main character. And with Kid, we just don't know. So again, we wanna look at the purpose, we wanna look at the intention behind this. Because, okay, on one hand, you can say, well, this is a way of Oda hyping up Shanks, right? Which is completely fair, okay? I think it's a fair reason to say that. However, because Shanks is already one of the most hyped up characters in the entire story, this could come across as being overkill to some people. Like, I don't think anyone legitimately believed that Kid was going to win this. Also, I remember Oda saying that out of all the characters in One Piece, he finds Shanks to be the one that he can relate to the most. I mean, it's obvious that he loves Luffy more, right? That's his favorite, his golden child, but he relates to Shanks more. So I wonder how much of that has played a part in all of this. This is like the One Piece equivalent of Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars. Get my stuttering frog's name out your mouth. That whole situation came from a place of insecurity from Will Smith's relationship. Like, it was so obvious. Like, Will Smith had no power in his relationship in that moment because all it took was one look from Jada, and he was up on stage trying to overcompensate, trying to do something that in the moment he thought would make him look powerful. So I'm wondering if something similar might have happened here with Shanks as well, where Oda looked at the situation and he realized, I am not going to be giving Shanks a whole lot of panel time before he gets defeated by Teach. So before that happens, I really want to give Shanks a clear-cut win, right? That shows his power. So I'm going to give him something that makes him shine in the eyes of the reader before he reunites with Luffy and before he goes down to Teach. So he might have ended up deciding that using Kid was the best option to make Shanks Smith look powerful. Well, and then another purpose this serves is that it gets Shanks the poneglyph rubbings so that he can get to Laugh Tale. And that's also fair. You know, he's making his move to get the One Piece. Yet at the same time, it happens so fast. It's so quick. He makes it look so easy that it's like,
you couldn't have done that earlier.
But I guess he really was waiting for Luffy to awaken the Nika fruit so that he could start moving. Because Roger has been dead for 24 years. So in 24 years, he hasn't made a move to get the road poneglyphs. And then the other purpose you can say that this serves is that it gets rid of Kid. Like, this is Oda literally crossing Kid's name off the list, right? But then the question to that, though, is if this is really it for Kid, like if this is the last time we see Kid in action, and all we get is like a panel later down the road, either during the final war or, during EOS. If that's all we're ever going to get out of Kid, if that's the only thing that Kid's character was going to amount to, then why was it that there was a noticeable amount of effort from Oda to frame Kid as this potential competitor for Luffy from the beginning? Because I remember back during the Uran prison days where Oda had both Kid and Luffy sort of competing in terms of who could train the hardest. I remember people were saying like, oh, look, Luffy finally found his Vegeta. So that was the sentiment I think that a lot of us shared, that Kid was going to be sort of the Vegeta to Luffy's Goku. But because of the way things are now, I honestly think that the best case scenario for Kid would be for him to show up near the end of the Shanks versus Blackbeard fight, and then him have a role in taking down Shanks, or him playing a role that's instrumental in Shanks' defeat or death. So maybe Shanks ends up getting the upper hand and he has Teach pinned to the ground and he's about to finish him, but all of a sudden Kid shows up out of nowhere and he's like, this is for what you did to me in Killer. And so that ends up creating an opening for Blackbeard to fatally injure Shanks. By the way, given the fact that we do see Shanks using Divine Departure, and given the fact that that was obviously a technique that Roger used Ace for, Ace being Roger's supreme greatsword, I think it's now incredibly likely that Shanks' sword, Griffin, is also a supreme greatsword. Especially if you consider that Shanks used to clash with Mihawk at times, they used to spar, and Mihawk's Yoru is also a supreme greatsword. So it's very fitting for the strongest Yonko, who also has the strongest crew, who used to clash with the world's strongest swordsman, to also have one of the strongest types of blades in the verse. Additionally, if the theories about Shanks being a celestial dragon end up being true because of what we learned back in Film Red, where we see Roger, Rayleigh, and Scopper Gavin finding baby Shanks inside of a treasure chest after God's Valley, if it does turn out that Shanks was actually born as a celestial dragon, that he was actually born a world noble, then the name of the attack, Divine Departure, fits him perfectly because he's departing from the divine. The celestial dragons are supposed to be the gods, the divine entities of the One Piece world, so he's departing from that. He started there, but he decided to make his life as a pirate. That is going to do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found some of the points that I raised in this video to be thought-provoking. I thought this chapter was a bittersweet reminder that not a whole lot of us get to have main character plot armor in life. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed the video. I really did enjoy my time reflecting on it, so hopefully that comes across. Take care, have a great rest of the week, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.